Hey guys, just a quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. When I decided to sell my old LaserActive game console on eBay, I thought it would be a quick and easy way to make some spare cash. This obscure game system from the 90s had become sort of a cult classic among retro gaming collectors. I figured even non-working, my dusty LaserActive tucked away in storage would fetch a decent price from the right buyer. After digging it out and wiping off the cobwebs, I took a few photos and listed it on eBay for $200 as is, no returns accepted. I wanted to be upfront that this vintage console may have some issues, so the buyer would need to be purchasing just for the novelty or parts. My asking price reflected that this was not guaranteed to be in working condition. Within a few days, I received a notification that someone had placed a bid on my listing. When I checked the bidder's profile, I saw this person had zero eBay feedback. Their account seemed to have been created specifically to bid on my LaserActive. This raised some red flags, since most eBay users develop feedback over time from buying and selling. Still, I figured I would give them the benefit of the doubt as long as they followed through with payment. After the auction ended, the buyer had won with a bid of $180. I sent them an official invoice through eBay's system and waited for my payment notification. A few days passed without any word from them. I sent a couple friendly reminders through eBay, thinking maybe they had overlooked the invoice or were delayed for some reason. Still nothing. At this point, I started to suspect I was dealing with someone who didn't understand how eBay worked. I decided to cancel the transaction on my end, since they had not paid within the required time frame. Right after I canceled, the buyer suddenly came to life and began barraging me with messages through eBay's system. The messages were written in broken English, as if they had been run through an automated translation program. The general tone was angry and demanding. They were insisting I ship the LaserActive to them immediately without having paid. I tried to politely explain that on eBay, customers must pay before sellers ship items. This was non-negotiable. However, the buyer became increasingly belligerent, cursing at me and threatening to call the police if I did not ship them the LaserActive right away. They made it clear they had no intention of paying me until after they had the item in their possession. I reiterated that this was not how eBay worked, but they were growing more hostile at the message. This user quickly became downright harassing, sending strings of threatening messages through eBay. That is when they apparently took it upon themselves to search my eBay username, which I had also used on my YouTube account. From there, they were able to find my personal email address and discover the various internet forums I frequently posted on. This deranged buyer now began sending me threatening emails and messages through all these outside platforms, saying they were going to ruin me if I did not hand over the decades-old game system. They used the personal details gleaned from my YouTube videos and forum posts in an attempt to publicly blackmail me online. I was horrified to see my own content weaponized against me. Whenever I turned on my computer, my inbox was flooded with dozens of unhinged messages from this person, ranting about the LaserActive. No matter how much I explained it was only a used collector's item, they had become scarily obsessed with obtaining it by any means necessary. As if this were not enough, they took the next step of leaving negative feedback on my eBay account, accusing me of scamming them out of the LaserActive. I immediately reported the harassing messages and retaliatory feedback to eBay. Still, this did not deter the buyer, who continued their relentless crusade against me. I realized I needed to cut this off quickly before things got even more out of hand. I deleted all of my YouTube videos except those that did not show my face. I also shut down my profiles in the internet forums where this person had tracked me down. My online presence had provided them too much ammunition. Additionally, I forwarded the harassing emails to Google and requested they ban this abusive user from their services. Thankfully, Google agreed the messages violated their terms and banned the buyer's account. As a last resort, I contacted eBay again with extensive evidence of this buyer's disturbing harassment campaign against me. Finally, eBay removed the negative feedback and permanently banned the user from their platform. This nightmarish eBay experience left me feeling violated and unsafe online. I could not believe a simple auction had unleashed such an unhinged, vengeful individual over a used game system, no less. The buyer's persistence in bombarding me across multiple sites was astounding and frightening. In hindsight, I regretted not being more cautious when a zero feedback user made such a targeted purchase. I learned the hard way to thoroughly vet potential buyers, even if it means turning down their business. Feedback scores exist for a reason, and I will not take that risk again. Although the ordeal was harrowing, I was relieved I could reclaim some privacy by deleting my online accounts. eBay ultimately protected me as a seller from the harassment, but I will never forget that online interactions with strangers carry the potential for real danger. My one eBay horror story taught me to be much more careful about protecting my personal information in the future. I've been an active eBay seller for over a decade now, initially just selling off a few things from around my house that I no longer needed. But over time, it's grown into a fun side business finding unique vintage items, collectibles, and gaming systems to fix up and resell for a profit. There's a real thrill that comes from coming across a cool retro find at a garage sale or thrift store and giving it new life by cleaning it up and passing it along to a fellow collector. However, while 95% of buyers are great, there's always a few bad apples looking to take advantage and scam honest sellers. Let me tell you in detail about one of the most ridiculous attempted buyer scams I've dealt with in all my years on eBay. Started when I came across a limited edition Game Boy Advance SP while browsing a local thrift shop. This was back around 2007 when this SP was still a popular system and retro gaming was starting to become more sought after. Among SP collectors, the Cobalt Blue Edition was one of the harder to find colors, made in more limited quantities. When I saw this one sitting in a glass case, I could tell it was in near pristine condition. The previous owner clearly barely used it, if at all. The screen was flawless, the shell totally unscuffed, and it even still had the original plastic screen protector on it. It really looked brand new. Even better, it came complete in the original box with all the manuals and paperwork untouched. This was a truly mint collector grade example. After testing it and verifying it was in perfect working order, I happily paid the $20 thrift store price tag. Based on eBay sold listings at the time, these Cobalt SPs in this condition were selling in the $150 $200 range. So with some basic cleaning and polishing, I knew I could more than double my investment. Once home, I gave this SP a thorough inspection and light restoration. Using plastic polish and a microfiber cloth, I carefully buffed out any minor imperfections in the shell, making it shine like new. I wiped down the screen to give it back that flawless, glossy look. Aside from a bit of dust, it really looked like it just came straight from the factory. It was collector grade all the way. I took a ton of high-resolution photos showing every angle and detail, making sure to clearly showcase the pristine condition for the listing. In the description, I was upfront and honest, accurately describing it as like new/near mint condition. I provided background on the limited edition Cobalt color and mentioned how hard it was to find an example this nice. Given the immaculate shape it was in, I listed it for $185 with free priority shipping on the higher end of the going rate. Within a day, I had an eager buyer with strong feedback pay full price. I safely packaged it up with ample padding and bubble wrap and shipped it out promptly. The delivery confirmation showed it arrived at his address without any issues. I assumed that was the end of things and was pleased to make such a nice profit on my thrift store find. But then about a week later, I received a terse message from the buyer stating the Game Boy SP had numerous scratches and scuffs on the shell, which he claimed I had failed to disclose. He said it was clearly not in the mint condition I had promised, and he wanted a full refund immediately. I was truly shocked, as I knew for a fact it was absolutely pristine when I sent it. Just to be fair, I promptly issued a full refund and apologized that he was not satisfied. I then politely requested he return it so I could inspect the supposed damage myself and see what may have happened during shipping. However, the weeks went by and he never sent it back, ignoring my repeated polite messages, asking if he had shipped the return yet. At this point, I realized he likely was just a scammer trying to get a free system, as he had no real intention of sending the SP back to me. I was honestly pretty upset at essentially being scammed out of $185 and a rare SP system. but since I had already refunded him, my options were limited under eBay's policies. I couldn't even leave appropriate negative feedback about what happened due to eBay's feedback system rules. As a last-ditch effort, I sent a strongly worded message stating I would need to get law enforcement involved if he persisted in unlawfully keeping the stolen item. This was mostly just an empty threat on my part without much legal standing, but I hoped it would prompt him to do the right thing. Surprisingly, he did right back, but only with a litany of excuses and finger-pointing. He blamed eBay's system for not generating a return label, me for refunding too quickly, everything under the sun except taking any personal responsibility. There was also a fair amount of profanity and insults thrown my way, real class act. After a ridiculous amount of back and forth, he finally agreed to return it as a favor to me. When I received it weeks later, the shipping box was badly damaged and the power adapter was suspiciously missing. However, the Game Boy SP itself was in the precise, flawless, pristine condition I had sent it. Not a single scratch or scuff anywhere, just as I had described. It was now obvious this guy had completely fabricated the whole thing in order to get a free system. He likely damaged the packaging himself to make it look like it arrived that way. Some dishonest buyers will come up with all kinds of elaborate lies and schemes to try and take advantage of sellers. I was able to relist and sell the Game Boy again, though unfortunately for a lower price without the power cable. But the terrible experience left a bad taste in my mouth that still lingers. I've since implemented more stringent policies when selling high-value items to help prevent this kind of nonsense from happening again. It's truly a shame there are immoral buyers out there trying to cheat honest sellers just making a living. The vast majority of buyers are great and have had mostly positive experiences, but it only takes one bad apple to ruin your day and make you more cautious. I'm continually amazed at the lengths some people will go to in order to get something for nothing. It takes a special kind of lowlife to repeatedly lie, scam, and steal from others without an ounce of guilt or remorse. Some people have no moral compass at all. I try not to let it dampen my enthusiasm for reselling, but encounters like that certainly test my faith in humanity. It's the unfortunate cost of doing business, I suppose, and I'm thankful the majority of my eBay experiences have been positive, but I definitely learned to protect myself better against potential scams after dealing with that deceitful buyer. It left a bad taste in my mouth, but ultimately made me a wiser seller. By sharing my story, I hope others can avoid the same pitfalls and always be vigilant against the scammers out there. When I saw that vintage alarm clock listed on eBay for just $15, I couldn't believe my luck. As someone who loves antique home decor, I was always on the hunt for unique vintage finds to spruce up my modest apartment. My budget was tight, so scoring an ornate retro clock for such a steal seemed too good to pass up. I hastily placed my order, giddily anticipating its arrival. The clock showed up on my doorstep just 2 days later, carefully packaged inside a nondescript cardboard box. I eagerly tore open the packaging and pulled out my new treasure. It was even more beautiful than it looked online. A classic wind-up alarm clock with brass finishings and delicate floral etchings along the rim. Winding the key a few turns, I delighted in the gentle ticking that filled my quiet bedroom. I positioned the clock proudly on my nightstand, admiring how perfectly it accented my vintage-inspired space. For the first week or so, I was enamored with my new purchase. I loved waking up to the nostalgic chime of its morning alarm, such a soothing sound compared to the harsh beeps of digital clocks. Each night, I would wind the key a few turns, feeling comforted by its familiar ticking lulling me asleep. About 2 weeks after getting the clock, however, I started noticing some peculiar noises coming from it at odd hours. I'd be reading in bed when a sudden sharp click would make me jump. In the middle of the night, I'd be startled awake by a whirring, grinding noise. At first, I assumed these were just quirks of its old mechanical workings, but the disturbances became more frequent and disruptive. I began dreading going to sleep, laying restlessly in bed as the clock seemed to grow louder with its bizarre creaks and clicks. I even removed the batteries, hoping it would stop the noises, but they persisted somehow. One night, I awoke with a start to see a faint red glow pulsating through the clock's glass face, like the blinking of an electronic device. I tapped the glass and the light vanished, leaving me unsettled. The following evening, I resolved to get to the bottom of this. As I got ready for bed, the clock was eerily silent, But just as I switched off my bedside lamp, a loud thud made me cry out in alarm. Heart pounding, I peered into the darkness but saw nothing amiss. The silence in the room felt heavy and ominous. Hands shaking, I turned my lamp back on and cautiously examined the clock. That's when I noticed it, a tiny pinhole lens cleverly embedded in the clock's casing. Dread flooded my body as I realized what it must be. Wrenching open the back panel, my fears were confirmed. Someone had installed a hidden camera inside the clock, rigged to a battery pack. I sat there in horror, realizing the implications of what I discovered. This clock hadn't been an innocent vintage find. It was a sinister ploy to covertly spy on me. Nausea washed over me as I thought back to everything I had done in front of that clock, unsuspecting of the pervert watching me through its lens. I felt violated and contaminated. Frantically, I searched every corner and crevice of my home for more hidden cameras, though I found none. Whoever had orchestrated this had been cunning enough to just use the clock. But why me? Was it just some random sicko who got a thrill out of spying on strangers? I grappled with paranoia, imagining where the footage of me could end up. Had it been streamed online? Saved to some depraved person's computer? The unknowns compounded the violation I felt. I kept picturing a stranger's eyes on me, even in my most vulnerable and private moments. In a daze, I dismantled the rest of the clock, removing its intricate insides until all that remained was an empty shell. I wanted to smash it to bits, but knew I had to keep it intact for evidence. I filed a police report along with contacting eBay to report the seller. The authorities seemed apathetic, saying hidden cameras in homes were nearly impossible to trace. I felt helpless, knowing my anonymous violator would likely never be brought to justice. In the following weeks, I became increasingly withdrawn and paranoid. I felt unsafe in the one place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. I hardly slept, instead staying up all night anxiously patrolling my home. It was taking a steep toll on my mental health. Ultimately, I decided my only option was to move out. The day I relocated, I walked out and left that cursed clock sitting on the curb. Just looking at it made me sick. I hoped whoever took it would dismantle it completely. I moved across town into a new apartment, which I promptly scoured for any signs of hidden recording devices. I had to take back my sense of security piece by piece. In hindsight, I was foolish to let my guard down. I should have been more cautious buying electronics secondhand. But it angers me that the burden is on the victims to prevent such violations, rather than on the perpetrators. I share my cautionary tale as a reminder that privacy is precious, and no deal is worth compromising that. Be vigilant, trust your instincts, and know that your comfort and safety should always come first, however you secure them. For me, that meant starting over in a new home and not taking security for granted ever again. I will never forget the fateful day I clicked buy it now on that 1916D Mercury dime listed on eBay. As an avid numismatist who lived and breathed rare coins, I was always scouring auction sites looking for good deals to grow my prized collection. When I stumbled upon the listing for that coveted key date Mercury dime, seemingly priced well below its actual value, I felt a surge of excitement. In that moment, visions of scoring a once-in-a-lifetime bargain clouded my judgment and obscured the potential red flags. I was too focused on the prize to exercise my usual caution and due diligence. That lapse would soon turn the purchase into a devastating nightmare from which I am still trying to recover. As a longtime coin collector specializing in 20th century American issues, I had particular interest in completing a set of Mercury dimes. The 1916D is well known as the undisputed king of the series due to its microscopically low mintage of just 264,000 pieces. High-grade examples with strong details routinely fetch five-figure prices at auction. So when I spotted a raw 1916D dime graded Extra 40 up for auction with a starting bid under $500, I was immediately suspicious yet intrigued. The photos showed a clean, problem-free coin with no distractions, exactly the quality I hoped to someday add to my set. In the back of my mind, warning signs flashed that the coin was likely too good to be true at such a bargain basement price. But the seller had solid feedback scores in the thousands, so I convinced myself they must simply not realize the true value of what they possessed. My desire to score the deal of the century overrode any doubts or caution. I placed the winning bid of $425 and excitedly completed the PayPal payment, already envisioning displaying my new treasure at upcoming coin shows. The seller had advertised fast shipping, so I was eagerly tracking the package online. Sure enough, just 3 days later, it showed as delivered while I was at work. The remaining hours I spent in the office that day dragged by at a snail's pace. I could not stop thinking about getting home to open the package and finally see my dream coin in person. When I arrived home, I bolted straight for the mail pile on the counter. I tore open the small box and dumped the contents onto the table, my hands shaking with anticipation. As expected, inside I found a small flip holder containing a 1916D mercury dime. Under the glare of the dining room light, I used a magnifying lens to inspect every detail. Just as the photos advertised, it appeared completely original and untampered with. The details matched an Exta 40 designation, and the signature crossbands on the facets were clearly visible. I had no reason to question its legitimacy. I proudly placed it in my 1916 mercury dime album, which up until then had a noticeable empty spot where the rare 1916D should be. The album was the crowning achievement of my collection, something I had spent 15 years and over $50,000 assembling. And now, finally, the king coin I never dreamed of owning was mine. For a few weeks, I was able to bask in the satisfaction of filling that elusive hole in my set. I had scored what seemed like the deal of a lifetime, or so I thought at the time. My numismatic bliss came crashing down the morning, and I heard a loud knock at my front door. I opened it to see 2 police officers who asked to speak with me about an ongoing stolen property and fencing investigation. They explained that a series of rare coin thefts had been traced back to a suspect eBay seller who was using the platform to efficiently fence his ill-gotten goods. According to their records, I had purchased a 1916D mercury dime from that seller just weeks prior. They needed to confiscate it as evidence and take my statement. I was completely blindsided and stunned as I tried to process this bombshell revelation. With shaky hands, I retrieved the coin from my album and handed it to the officers. They could clearly see the shock and despair on my face. I gave them my statement and detailed the purchase for their records, but that was only the beginning of the months-long nightmare to follow. I soon found myself embroiled in the extensive investigation against my will, needing to verify my records, testify before a grand jury, and repeatedly explain myself to skeptical investigators who suspected I may be complicit. The stress took a severe toll on my health, relationships, and reputation as I was treated like a potential criminal myself. My wife grew increasingly frustrated with the disruption to our lives, and I could feel her starting to pull away from me. Throughout the ordeal, I was absolutely racked with guilt over my lapse in judgment. As an experienced collector, I should have noticed the obvious red flags. I should have researched the seller more thoroughly or had the coin authenticated and graded by a third party before purchase. But I let the prospect of an unbeatable deal override my critical thinking and expertise. I ended up paying dearly for that mistake. Adding insult to injury, I never saw the coin again after handing it over to the police that first day. It remained in law enforcement custody indefinitely as a crucial piece of evidence against the coin theft ring. I was simply an unwitting buyer caught in the crossfire, but that didn't make losing the coin any easier to swallow. The empty space in my mercury dime album will forever remind me of my costly misstep. In the aftermath, I became much more cautious when buying coins online. I now vet each seller extensively, watch for warning signs, and refuse to let bargain prices distract me from doing my due diligence. While I was fortunate to avoid any legal ramifications myself, the damage to my reputation and pride was extensive. My wife came dangerously close to leading me over the stress this disaster caused to our relationship. It is an experience I will never forget, though I wish I could. To this day, I still have nightmares of once again seeing the police at my door ready to pen my life over yet another too-good-to-be-true online coin deal. My eBay horror story serves as a painful lesson every collector should heed. Selling on eBay had been my passion for over a decade. What started as a hobby to make some extra cash on the side quickly grew into a full-fledged business. I absolutely loved spending weekends treasure hunting at estate sales and thrift shops, never knowing what unique vintage pieces or valuable antiques I might uncover. The thrill of finding an underpriced gem combined with the satisfaction of building my eBay store made this more than just a job. It was my calling. which made having my first experience being outright scammed by a buyer all the more devastating. The Saturday had started off full of promise like so many before it. I woke up early, grabbed a quick breakfast, and headed out to hit a few sales in the wealthy part of town. I'd learned over the years that this neighborhood tended to yield higher quality merchandise from homeowners who spared no expense for top-of-the-line luxuries in life. I browsed a few estates, but nothing caught my eye until I walked into a massive house that had recently been cleared out. My eyes immediately honed in on a vintage Rolex watch in a glass case that the estate company had marked for only $500. I couldn't believe my luck. It appeared to be in flawless condition in its original box with paperwork certifying its authenticity. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up to inspect it closer. This was a major score. Comparable vintage Rolexes had recently sold on eBay for upwards of $10,000. Trying to contain my excitement, I paid for the watch and raced out to have it appraised by my jeweler. He confirmed it was a real deal, an immaculate 1956 men's Rolex Oyster Perpetual worth a small fortune. I wasted no time listing it on eBay for a buy at now price of $5,000. While it was likely worth double that, I wanted to move it quickly. As expected, within 24 hours, a buyer with flawless feedback swooped in and paid full asking price. I packaged the watch with extreme care, ensuring it was properly cushioned for its journey. I even splurged for signature confirmation delivery so I could rest assured knowing it had arrived safely. The morning after tracking showed it was successfully delivered, I treated myself to a fancy omelet breakfast to celebrate. This was the kind of massive flip that takes a reseller's business to the next level. I was absolutely thrilled and already making plans for how I'd reinvest the profits. But exactly 1 week after delivery, my elation turned to dread when I received a return request from the buyer. They provided photos showing the watch face visibly cracked and the band broken, and stated the item I sent was defective. I was flabbergasted. That watch was in mint condition when I packaged it. There's no way it could have been damaged that extensively in shipping. One glance at those photos, and I knew without a doubt the buyer had swapped it out with a cheap imposter. Though it pained me to do so, I immediately issued a refund as eBay requires for returns claiming not as described. Days later, the broken knockoff watch arrived on my doorstep. The cheap replacement band didn't even match the original. Holding it in my hands, I could feel anger rising in my gut. I'd been scammed by a buyer out to make a quick $5,000 at my expense. Furious, I tried contacting the buyer through eBay only to find they had already deleted their account. Of course, I spent hours on the phone with eBay customer service explaining the situation in detail, but they claimed there was nothing they could do since I had refunded voluntarily. No matter how much evidence I provided that I'd been conned, they said their hands were tied. Feeling violated and taken advantage of, I decided to leave the buyer a scathing review outlining exactly how they pulled off the scam. It was a long shot, but I hoped it might prevent them from conning another seller. Soon after posting it, threatening anonymous emails began flooding my inbox. The messages contained personal details about me and my family that left me shaken to the core. Demands to remove the review were accompanied by ominous warnings of what would happen if I didn't comply. I was so disturbed that I immediately took down all my active listings and removed the review. My passion for finding unique items to resell was replaced by paranoia. I no longer felt safe selling online or even hunting for valuables, constantly worried I was being watched. As much as it pained me, I decided to walk away from my eBay business completely. Having a side hustle just wasn't worth the torment of constantly watching over my shoulder, worrying for my family's safety. While the vast majority of eBay users are perfectly honest, that traumatic experience opened my eyes to the predators out there taking advantage of the system. Scammers and swindlers who will turn to threats and intimidation when caught. Perhaps if eBay had more oversight and protections in place for sellers, I could have avoided that nightmare. But ultimately, selling valuables to faceless strangers online comes with too much risk. The profits just aren't worth the devastation of being targeted and violated. Looking back, I was foolish to think my loyal customer base and solid reputation shielded me from harm. That tight-knit community protected me. I learned the hard way that some people will exploit any vulnerability to make a quick buck, no matter who gets hurt. As much as I love the thrill of the hunt, my sense of security and peace of mind is far more precious. While it was devastating to walk away, focusing that energy into new ventures has brought meaning back into my life. Though I'll always have a twinge of bitterness about how it ended, I'm grateful for the passion eBay selling brought me all those wonderful years. The key is moving forward without losing faith in humanity. I've always loved hunting for bargains online. There's just something so thrilling about scoring designer items for a fraction of retail price. So when I stumbled upon a listing for a super trendy handbag at 70% off, I jumped at the chance to snag it. The seller had great feedback and the photos looked legit, so I eagerly placed my bid without a second thought. A few days later, I had the notification that I had won the auction. I was over the moon excited for my new bag to arrive. I just knew it would become my go-to accessory. When the package finally showed up, I tore into it like a kid on Christmas morning. But as soon as I laid eyes on the bag, my stomach dropped. The cheap pleather and messy stitching made it obvious. This was 100% a counterfeit. My elation instantly turned to anger and embarrassment. How could I have been so stupid? I took a deep breath and composed a message to the seller explaining the situation. I was sure that once they realized their mistake, they'd apologize and offer me a refund. But instead, I received a chilling reply. Drop this immediately. You've been warned. I stared at the menacing words on my screen in disbelief. Was this person actually threatening me over a counterfeit bag? Unsure of what to think, I sent another strongly worded message demanding that the seller make things right. But this time there was no reply at all. Over the next few days, things only got stranger. I started receiving odd calls with nothing but silence on the other end. On my walk home from work one night, I noticed a dark sedan slowly trailing me for blocks. My pulse raced as I darted into my building, checking over my shoulder and keeping my hand on my pepper spray. It became clear this wasn't just about a knockoff purse. Something much more sinister was going on, and I was scared of what might happen if I continued to pursue this. But at the same time, I was angry. How dare this person rip me off and then intimidate me into silence? I was determined to uncover the truth. I spent hours combing the internet, piecing together clues about the seller's real identity. It was difficult, but eventually I managed to track down their name and home address. I decided to confront them in person and get to the bottom of this. The entire drive to their house, my mind was spiraling. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, irrationally expecting to see that dark sedan appear behind me again. When I finally pulled up, my hands were shaking as I approached the front door. A gruff, bearded man answered, eyeing me suspiciously. I told him I was there about the counterfeit bag, trying to keep my voice steady. But, at the mention of it, his expression turned ominous. I warned you what would happen if you didn't drop this, he growled before slamming the door in my face. I stood there stunned, my heart pounding. As I turned to leave, I noticed the curtain in an upstairs window fluttering, as if someone had been peering out at me. A chill ran down my spine, and I hurried back to my car. Over the next week, I became consumed with paranoia. I jumped at every little noise, convinced I was being watched. I started parking only in busy, well-lit lots and kept pepper spray on me at all times. I knew I needed to go to the police, but the seller's threats echoed in my mind, making me hesitate. The constant fear was unbearable. I wasn't sleeping, I could barely eat. I knew I had to do something before I completely unraveled, so I worked up the courage to file a report with the authorities. I recounted everything. The auction, the counterfeit bag, the harassment. The officers documented my statement, but I could tell they were doubtful. Weeks passed without any updates from them. I started to feel hopeless that anything would come of it. Until I got an unexpected call from the lead detective on my case, his voice urgent. Incredibly, they had managed to track down and arrest the seller, executing a search warrant on his home. What they uncovered was shocking and terrifying. This was no small-time knockoff purse operation. The seller was connected to an intricate international counterfeiting ring, raking in millions trafficking fake luxury goods online. And when customers got wise, he used violent, ruthless tactics to silence them. The threats against me were very real. Evidence seized from his home linked him to assaults, even a homicide. I shuddered to think what might have happened if I had ignored the warnings and kept pushing the issue. Thanks to my persistence, a dangerous criminal selling counterfeit items had been taken down, but I still felt scared by the experience. I stopped bidding at auction sites altogether, warier than ever of online sellers. Unexpected noises and strangers now put me on high alert. This trauma has changed me, but at least my story can serve as a cautionary tale for others. Be vigilant about vetting sellers' claims and trusting too good to be true deals. And if you suspect you've been ripped off, proceed with care in pursuing the matter, because you never know what darkness might be lurking behind that online profile. For me, the nightmare is over, but I still find myself glancing over my shoulder just in case. For over a decade now, eBay has been my go-to for finding unique treasures and vintage items. I love the thrill of bidding in those last frenzied seconds on something special that catches my eye. My wife says I spend too much time obsessively browsing listings, but to me it's a hobby, a harmless escape. I never thought it could lead to the disturbing chain of events that has left my family living in fear. It started when I came across a Victorian-era antique necklace. The delicate filigree pendant entranced me immediately. It was an ornate silver design with intricate swirling patterns and a large emerald stone in the center that seemed to glow an unearthly green. According to the seller, this necklace had been passed down through generations of her family, originally belonging to her great-great-grandmother in the late 1800s. I was captivated by the history and beauty of this antique piece. I could imagine it adorning the neck of a Victorian lady, the emerald glittering in the candlelight as she moved through a lavish ballroom. I knew I had to have it for my own collection. For days, I kept a close watch on the listing, upping my max bid little by little as competing bidders tried to win. The bidding war got intense, with the price shooting up higher than I expected. But I was determined to win this necklace. No matter what I had to pay, I simply had to possess this antique beauty. In the final seconds, I placed a winning bid that no one could top. The necklace was mine. I eagerly paid the steep price of $587 and awaited its arrival, imagining how I would display it in my curio cabinet. When the package came a few days later, excitement turned to confusion and unease. Instead of the antique necklace carefully wrapped in tissue paper, the box contained only a plain white note card reading "Enjoy it while you can." Puzzled, I contacted the seller immediately, but she seemed just as baffled as me, insisting she had packaged and shipped the necklace right after I paid. She had no idea where it could have gone or who would have sent this creepy note. Uneasy but wanting to give her the benefit of the doubt, I decided to wait and see if the necklace would still arrive in a separate mailing. The seller said she would contact the post office to investigate as well. But days went by with no sign of the necklace. My impatience turned to anger and frustration. That necklace was rightfully mine. I had won the auction fair and square. That's when the messages started coming. They came from newly created eBay accounts with zero feedback or transaction history. "I know where you live," the first one said. Then another asked, "How's your daughter Emily enjoying her new bike?" These anonymous messages continued, each revealing more unsettling personal details about me and my family. It was clear someone had been watching us closely, gathering information about our home, our daily activities, even our birthdays and gifts. How did they know my daughter had just gotten a new pink bicycle for her 7th birthday? She was so thrilled with it, riding it up and down our street. But now the joy of that memory was corrupted, knowing some stranger had been spying on these private family moments. I was deeply disturbed. How had a simple eBay purchase given this predator access to so much of our private lives? Were they able to hack into my account and get my home address? The messages grew increasingly more threatening over the coming weeks. Our security systems and closed blinds provided little comfort as the taunts continued. "I'm always watching you. You can't hide from me." My wife and I considered moving far away just to escape this faceless tormentor, but would that even help? This person somehow knew so much about us already. We decided to go to the police instead. After I showed them the threatening messages, they agreed to start an investigation, but warned that cyber cases like this were very difficult to crack. They said they would try to trace the IP addresses of the messages, but couldn't make any guarantees. Then late one night, I came home to find our front door inexplicably standing wide open. My heart seized as I frantically searched each room, fearing some intruder had been inside. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet the idea that someone could access our home so easily filled me with dread. Had the stalker been right here in our house while we slept? The thought made me sick. I quickly installed new high-tech locks, but still couldn't shake the feeling of violation. The eBay messages grew even more aggressive after that, mocking my attempts to protect my family. I had become a paranoid, emotional wreck. Drastic measures were needed. We changed all passwords, got an unlisted number, installed cameras and alarms, and moved to a different town without telling a soul. It's been months now since we went completely off the grid, and the terrifying messages have finally ceased. But we keep our online presence to a bare minimum, and I still constantly check the home security, jolting awake at the slightest noise. I may never learn the identity of the stalker who appended our lives over an eBay auction. The police had no leads. I still look over my shoulder everywhere I go, wary of being watched. My sense of safety has been irreparably damaged. Picking up the pieces and feeling normal again seems doubtful. I don't know if we ever will. Sometimes I still think of that antique necklace, its emerald glinting across the decades, beckoning to me. As much as I wanted it for my collection, the price I paid was too high. No object, no matter how unique or beautiful, is worth sacrificing your peace of mind. My love of hunting treasures on eBay died after that nightmare ordeal. Now I stick to antique stores in person for such finds. At least that way I can be sure what I purchase will safely come home with me, not lure some unseen menace into my life. Though nothing can undo the damage already done. My family will forever be scared, always glancing over our shoulders, seeing threats in every stranger. That is the true cost that can never be repaid. It started out small, just a few random packages showing up on my doorstep that I didn't order. At first, I thought it was just a mix-up, so I contacted the sellers to let them know. They were always apologetic, saying they must have accidentally put in the wrong address. No big deal. I figured it was bound to happen every now and then with so many online orders these days. But then it kept happening. Every week, sometimes more than once, another mystery package would arrive. It was getting ridiculous. I started refusing the deliveries, writing return to sender on them. Still, the unwanted parcels kept coming. I decided to track down the return addresses, thinking maybe it was the same seller messing with me. But each package came from a different person, all across the country. That's when I realized something more sinister was going on. Someone was using my address to order things on eBay and have them sent to me. But who? And why target me? The items themselves seemed random at first. A used book I'd never heard of. A single shoe. A potato peeler. Just odd, useless junk. I threw most of it away without even opening it. I didn't understand why anyone would go through the trouble of having this stuff sent to my house. It seemed like a bizarre prank. Then the packages started to get creepy. One day a box arrived containing a child's doll with the eyes cut out. It freaked me out. After that, every delivery seemed designed to disturb me. A fake severed hand. Photographs of me going about my daily business. Even a dead rat. Each time I hoped it would be the last, but the nightmare packages kept coming. I was scared, but tried not to let it show whenever I tossed the latest box, unopened, into the trash. I didn't want to give whoever was behind this the satisfaction of knowing they had gotten to me. But they had. I was terrified, paranoid that I was being watched. I hardly slept, jolting awake at the slightest noise outside. My peaceful little house no longer felt safe. The police weren't much help at first. They said that since the packages themselves weren't dangerous, there wasn't really a crime being committed. They told me to just throw the items away and try to ignore it, but I persisted, determined to make them take me seriously. I started documenting everything I received. I took photos of the disturbing items and saved them along with the return addresses of the senders. I showed the police the escalating nature of the packages, how they were clearly meant to frighten me. Finally, a female officer who seemed to empathize agreed to open an investigation. While waiting to hear back from the police, I became a virtual recluse. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary. I let my mailbox overflow with letters rather than risk finding another disturbing package. I just couldn't take it anymore. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The waiting and isolation took a toll on me. I hardly ate or slept, consumed by fear of what might be coming next. I jumped at small noises. I cried often from frustration and stress. I was angry that someone was allowed to torment me this way, that the police couldn't seem to stop it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of harassment, I got a call from the investigating officer saying they had a suspect. She didn't want to tell me too much over the phone, but asked me to come to the station right away. My hands shook as I drove there. my mind racing with possibilities. Who could it be? Would I know them? Why me? Did they really have enough to make an arrest? The female officer met me kindly, sitting me down in a private room. She explained they had caught the perpetrator thanks to a stakeout at a post office drop box where he'd been leaving the latest packages addressed to me. I felt dizzy with relief just knowing they had someone in custody. Turns out it was a guy I briefly dated years ago. I could barely even remember him. Our relationship was so short and uneventful. But apparently he'd never gotten over our breakup and had been harboring a grudge all this time. The officer showed me his picture. It took me a minute to even recognize him. The quiet, shy man I'd gone out with a handful of times had turned into a sinister stalker. I was shocked when they told me about the storage unit he rented filled with all kinds of bizarre and unsettling items he purchased online to send me. The level of planning and obsession was hard to comprehend. This man had dedicated years to tormenting me from afar. I broke down as the gravity of it all sunk in. The fear, isolation, and stress of the past months overwhelmed me. The officer comforted me, apologizing for not being able to stop it sooner. She told me I was brave and strong for persisting until an arrest was made. I was immensely relieved when they arrested him and the harassing packages finally stopped. I was able to start rebuilding my life again, feeling safe in my own home. I took the officer who helped me out to lunch to personally thank her. I told her I wasn't sure I would have made it through without her belief in me and determination to get to the bottom of what was happening. I still get anxious anytime there's an unexpected knock at the door, but each day it gets a little better. The darkness that man brought into my life is finally receding. The kindness of the police officer who helped me through that nightmare restored my faith in human nature. I will always be grateful to her for taking me seriously when it felt like no one else would. She saved me in more ways than one. With time and therapy, I've been able to move forward and not let that traumatic experience define me. I have an alarm and security cameras now that help me feel safer. I've made progress learning not to constantly fear what bizarre thing might show up on my doorstep next. What happened shook me deeply, but did not break me. I refuse to let that stalker have any more power over my life.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.